The Lost Ones is a satire on the current UK immigration system, amongst other things. And it's kind of built on improvisation and animation. It shows a kind of ridiculous nightmare situation.
If you've not yet paid the full fee, you must do so now at the payment facility section, which is open Monday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 9 to 9:15.
In the film, ultimately, we only cast people with UK accents. The reason for that was I decided that I wanted the film to be about the hostile environment rather than about its maybe more obvious victims or any particular group of people who've kind of fallen foul of that system. So it's about the kind of atmosphere in the UK that kind of produces this environment rather than any particular group that have kind of suffered by it. As if the system has come to a point where it's almost like eating itself in a way, like it's become so exaggerated that it's like out of control. And the idea was to cast people that had enough of a range of accents and backgrounds so that they could sort of reasonably feel like they represented the whole of the UK.
Where is your home?
It's Brixton Hill, South London.
My house is in Edinburgh.
In Kent.
In Carlisle.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
Are you listening to me?
The idea of weaponized paperwork was something that I came across in an article by William Davies that was specifically about the Windrush scandal. It just made so much sense as a way of kind of describing what that is. The processes that people have to go through to gain asylum or residence in the UK are so difficult that effectively it rules people out through the complexity of it, right? So the bureaucracy, because of the way it's carried out, reduces immigration figures and gets closer to government targets on immigration. Something that Davies sort of identifies very effectively is that these processes that might seem quite benign, like filling out a form, actually are as significant and as sort of violent as any sort of physical border that we might have. So they become barriers, even though it might just seem like a simple application process. It's actually a lot more than that, and it has a kind of violence to it.
Do they or their partner have any physical or mental conditions which require personal care or medical assistance at home? And do they have any learning difficulties?
Yes.
I don't have a learning difficulty.
No to the learning difficulty and yes to the mental capacity.
Slight.
I'm interested in these situations where people are kind of put on the back foot in some way, and where those kind of power dynamics become very kind of cruel almost, very emphasised.
14 stone.
You don't seem to be sure.
What is your sexuality?
I'm gay.
Wow! Who'd have thought it?
Obviously there are immigration centres, and that's where the name comes from. Premium Service Centre is the name of a whole kind of category of office, I suppose, like immigration kind of facilities. But also it's a bit more than that, like it's kind of a metaphorical space. In its kind of smallness and containedness, it maybe relates a bit to the island of Britain as well. I mean, obviously it looks quite kind of stagey, but also it needed to have this sort of uncared for feeling to it. So that's where the kind of manky bin comes in, and there's kind of very generic plastic chairs that you see in the set. I suppose the photograph of the castle, for me, sort of has this, it's a kind of double reference to this kind of particular idea of heritage, which is very strong in British culture, I think. But then also this idea of like Britain as a sort of fortress, like a fortified space. I've used stop frame animation for parts of the footage. To me, that's a process that it's where you kind of give life by tiny incremental movements. And to me also there's something about those bureaucratic systems that are also maintained by these tiny little actions that add up to something, well, in this case, kind of horrifying.
Are you planning to start a family?
No, I have a family.
How many children do you have?
3.
Too many. single, separated.
So in the video you do hear, quite often you hear the voice as this kind of disembodied voice. I think to an extent that's common to really any experience of state apparatus, to an extent that it's always sort of removed from the actual agents of the state. So for example, like immigration, people that work in immigration are not the state, right? They're not deciding these questions, they're just kind of carrying it out. To me, that's sort of, you know, people like Zizek and Mark Fisher are interested in this idea of the big other, the kind of, the other that any sort of cruelty or violence or like nastiness basically can be deferred to. So you can say, oh, it's not me, it's not my fault, it's this, like it's this other thing, like I'm just sort of I'm the messenger. And I suppose in this film, it's sort of asking like, well, what if that big other is actually kind of like a small, horrible, nasty creature? So at certain points in the edit, there is no voice asking the questions. You just purely get people sort of answering these questions. We don't hear what the questions are, and we don't always see the creature or the space that the creature lives in. So I suppose then what we're left with is people complying to a system, but without kind of being forced to necessarily. Like it's just kind of carrying on.
My passport's up to date. Well, I've got my previous passport, but obviously that's not my expired passport, no.
There are elements of like very black humour within it, and there are even some like overt jokes buried in there.
I'm engaged to be married to one of my colleagues.
This is not an acceptable response. We accept the following categories: married, unmarried, civil partner, single, separated, divorced, widowed, sleeping around.
And that's kind of what part of the reason that I wanted to work with Alistair Beaton, who co-wrote the script, the questions. So Alistair Beaton is a satirist and has written lots of political satire for TV and more recently for the stage. I was quite interested in working with him because he has a completely different approach to subject matter to me, I think. Like it's very direct, so having these very contrasting ways in to a subject between me and him was quite a productive kind of friction, I think. When we started working on the script, which was a set of questions essentially, what we did to begin with was to get hold of as many forms that related to different strands of the immigration process. So things like spousal visa applications, asylum applications, the particular special form that was released of the Windrush generation that had to suddenly apply for leave to remain. So we looked at all this range of different questions that exist that are issued by the Home Office. We also looked at the Life in the UK test. So several of the questions that are in the video are from this kind of Life in the UK test. They're kind of, actually the more bizarre ones tend to be the ones that are actually from real exams and real forms.
What was the last great battle between the UK and France?
The Napoleonic Wars.
The Jerwood FVU Awards allowed me to work on a much bigger scale than I have done before. There was at least 35 people involved in the making of this film. But also I've never really worked with that kind of close support over that extended period of time before. So it was just amazing to work with a producer that was kind of quite intimately involved with making the work, as were other people at FVU and Jerwood.
I understand that I may be liable to prosecution, detention and rapid deportation. If I have knowingly or recklessly provided false information.